Hello everyone, welcome to another LIFECAST, and this one is a special one because we're talking about perspective. It's going to be in two parts. Part one now here in Liverpool. Part two is going to be recorded immediately after our trip to Auschwitz, which I can guarantee will be a different tone to probably the one sitting here drinking a beer now. And I just think it's going to be great to talk perspective, given the two completely different things we have experienced recently. The whole dynamic, I think the location, I think everything about it will just give a different perspective on the two podcasts. So something really exciting. Your idea, I think it was a great shout.
I think one of the things about Be the Standard that we did, that obviously you're heavily involved in now, is it was all about getting people to reflect. And a lot of the time, because it's when you reflect, you gain perspective. And a lot of why we set up Be the Standard in the early days, and for those that don't know, it's a leadership club in the main for high growth businesses that have got leaders. And what you tend to find in those high growth businesses or high performing businesses is the business gets carried away and the individual hasn't got the time to focus upon themselves. So the Be the Standard club is to focus upon the individual, to self-develop, and that means reflecting. As I say, because I think only when you actually take stock, it allows you sometimes, not all the time, to be a bit more pragmatic. And I think one of the things I've looked at in life is, not whether it's the same for you, is whenever you look at people who you admire, I might ask you what kind of people you admire, but I'll put you on the spot. Think about it maybe for in a second. But they tend to be people that have got this shit together. You know, Klopp always looks like a manager that's, he can take the rough with the smooth. I know he can moan a bit, but I think they can all moan a bit. But it tends to look like he can take the rough with the smooth. He has perspective. And I think you've got to be able to reflect at the bigger look at the bigger picture to get perspective. And so last year we went to Iceland, and we had reflection in the Blue Lagoon. And this year I thought, and it was we all had a great time, but not just a great time. We all spent 72 hours reflecting, goal setting, getting perspective. So when it comes to this year, I thought, where are we going to get that same level again? And it's quite nice being in Iceland, because being in the volcanoes and feeling quite earthy, feeling very natural. It's a great place, by the way, the Blue Lagoon. I haven't been back, but I would definitely go back and recommend it to anyone. But I feel like it's a place where you kind of chill a little bit. You kind of get brought down to a bit of natural, like, earthiness and grittiness, if you like. I thought, where are we going to go? And then I was Googling places, couldn't come up with anything. And then I think the Anne Frank Museum come up. And then I just thought, Auschwitz. And the minute that came up, like, the hair stood up on the back of my neck. And I thought, we've got to go. And I
mean, that is the ultimate place for reflection and perspective, really, isn't it? Reflecting back on what humanity has done over time, and your perspective on how, you know, your own being here, you know, our events that happened, you know, just a lifetime ago. I think it's going to be, I'm nervous about how I'm going to be feeling after it.
I can get quite emotional, me, quite easy, so God knows how it's going to be. I just think, look, the idea is,
before then, the perspective on what we're going to kind of witness in Auschwitz and the horrors that, you know, that happened. What are you like then with dealing with perspective now? Are you one of those that can kind of take a step back and take things in perspective? Or you kind of quite, you know, you're stuck in it really and you don't really look at the bigger picture? Generally, before, if you're like a life-changing, you know, visit to Auschwitz might be.
Coming back to like what I said to you before, is when I look at people who, I think, I always look at older people, because I'd spent a lot of time with my granddad when I was a kid. I always like to learn off older people. I always like looking at older people. I find them endearing and knowledgeable and wise, and I like being around that kind of thing. When you look at those people, or when I look at the people I admire, they're not volatile. They're not up and down. They've kind of got their shit together, as we would say. That to me is like non-volatile. you know.
As in they've got perspective on things.
So I feel like they can take the rough with the smooth. They can ride the waves. They don't get too carried away with the winds. They don't get too down with the dips. And I think that's how I would like to be.
That's a massive one. That I think when you do look at people who are maybe in sport, especially, I think, and they they've had a big win and they say won't get too carried away, and then they'll have a heavy loss and they say it's not as bad as you think. I think if you can do that in life, it's such a huge win, because that is life. If there's one thing you can guarantee in life, there's going to be highs and lows. And I think if you can get perspective on when things are going good and realise, actually, you know what, around the corner there'll be a little challenge that in this win won't feel as good. And if you can also keep perspective when you're feeling down in the dumps, and you can go, you know what, good times are coming, and we've had good. I think that is massive.
When you look at football and you look at fans, that's the problem, right? So the fans are cheering when they're winning, they're moaning when they're losing, and you can have a manager that's won 6, and everybody's praising him, and loses a game, and everybody's moaning. What you then need, every club needs, and this is the key to the successful clubs, is the leader, the head coach, the manager, being able to take that rough with a smooth. If the manager starts turning around and reacting like fans, you've got no hope. You've got no chance. What you tend to find, obviously, with the best coaches, in the end, they're able to have perspective. I remember, I think United got beat, was it 7-1 or 7-2 against Man City at Old Trafford? Back when Fergie was doing it. Back when Fergie was managing. And I'm sure inside he was boiling. But you kind of knew that he was going to take it in his stride. And that's the kind of person I would prefer to be. So, but I'm not naturally that person. And by the way, I think it comes with age to a large degree anyway. So I'm definitely not that
age and experience, I think. For me, I think the earliest, and I always put it down to, not that I would recommend anyone go through this, but I think losing my mum at such an early age taught me so much about life. And one of them was perspective. And I've used it in, to my advantage many, many times over. And one example I always give was I talk about joining the Marines. And it said 99.99% need not apply. And I thought, I'll be the 0.01. And I turned up knowing how physically demanding it was going to be, knowing how tough it was going to be leaving home at 17, knowing how, mentally tough it was going to be. But I had the perspective to think, it's not going to be as hard as when I lost my mum. It's going to be tough, but you know what? And I already, from a very early age, 17, had that perspective of how life, how tough life could be, but also how strong I was to get over it and get through it and see good times again. Despite, some of the horrendous, days, weeks, months we had with my mum and the aftermath. I also remember some amazingly happy memories through school and through, my dad and my sisters and things like that. So I think by the time I went into the adult world at 17 of joining the Marines, I'd already had a perspective on life of how tough it could be, but also how nice it could be as well. And I think that massively put me in good stead going into the adult world, to know that, it gave me a confidence as well.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
I think if you look at from the age of, is it 13 to 23, the amount of adversity you had is unusual. And I think that's why probably at 35, you've got more resilience than most people at 35, but you probably had it at 25. When people are still learning themselves, you've already been through these real dips in life that have given you the strength, really, to be resilient, have perspective.
I think perspective and resilience are definitely two of my qualities, but one of our viewers actually made a really good point, and unfortunately this is one of the negatives to my kind of character. It's because I've had such huge highs and lows. I think what perspective can sometimes do to me, which is a negative, is it can make me brush over some of the smaller stuff. So some of the kind of smaller things in life, day-to-day challenges, that still need addressing and still need sorting, if you like. I've definitely been known to just overlook them and put them to one side, because of that perspective's almost tricked me into thinking, hey, you've not been blown up today. You don't have to choose to have your leg amputated, You don't have to go down the IVF route. You don't need to these huge life-changing decisions No, it's only like, you know, putting the bins out. It doesn't matter. But then 3 weeks have gone by now and the bins haven't been put out once. Do you know, little things like that?
That interesting. As you was talking then, it gave me a new insight, because when I haven't had that kind of adversity in my life you've had. So if the littlest thing goes wrong, or the littlest thing's not right, or the littlest thing, well, it's either of them two, really. I like blow it up out of perspective, but get it done. Are you with me?
Yeah.
So as she was saying it then, you kind of hit home, really, that one of the things I would think that one of my skill sets in life is I get shit done.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I don't know whether I dramatise the enormity of just a small, sweating the small stuff, which means that I'm constantly on the small stuff.
But you're constantly getting stuff done though, aren't you?
And we talked about this a couple of podcasts ago. It was about balance when it came to, does imposter syndrome hold you back? Because nothing's a black or a white. Nothing's a, oh, you shouldn't have imposter syndrome. It's really bad for you. I feel the same with, the same with this topic, in that, it just dawned on me then that balance, I sweat the small stuff, but it does actually create an output where the small stuff's important to me, so I get it dealt with and done.
Mm-hmm. No, I think 100% that's the right way to go about it, because again, I think I might have told the examples of it in the past, and there's that many examples of them, like parking tickets, you know what I mean? And I'm like, oh, it's 30 quid, I'll pay it tomorrow. It doesn't get paid, and then, you know, a week later it's 200 quid. Like, why didn't I just pay it? Because because of my experience of perspective, it's not a big thing. It didn't really need dealing with, whereas you'd be on it, right, let me get that sorted, done. So I think there's definitely some balance to be had between both of our ways of looking at it.
There is, because I think sometimes I always look round and think, you meet somebody, or you get, you either get bad news, and I mean really bad news, or you get ill, and I mean really ill, and all of a sudden, all the small stuff that you've been sweating is irrelevant. The only thing you're bothered about is your mum, your dad who's ill, or you're ill, or who's in hospital, or everything else goes out the window. But if you operated every day where everything was out the window, you wouldn't get anything done.
Yeah.
The key, like the key to most things, is having enough balance where you're getting stuff done because it's important and you've got perspective, but not where you sweat stuff that's really not that important and you're constantly stressed, anxious. That's where I think a lot of stress and anxiety and the rest of it comes from.
It's great hearing you say that, because like most of these podcasts, I'll, you know, pick up on stuff and take it home, and that is definitely one of them, because there's definitely, no one could live life 100% like that all the time. Do you know what I mean? There's definitely a balance to be struck in all that, because both aren't productive.
No. So if I was on a continuum, on a range, I would be more blowing up, sweating the small stuff from that perspective. On perspective, I would be more towards that end, which is kind of a fuel stroke fire. But as we've talked in previous podcasts, that's led itself to anxiety. In my way, it does lend itself to a lot of stress and anxiety. I do think, though, the byproduct of that is I get a lot of stuff done. Yeah. Daily, weekly, hourly, there's stuff going on all the time that's getting done, because I think it's majorly important that other people irritate the hell out of me, by the way, by not thinking it's as important. They've maybe got more perspective on me than me. But living a life where you don't have perspective to a degree, where things have been so, you've overcome such like dips, such downs, that you can keep putting life into perspective. I wonder what you achieve in your 30s and 40s, because I think when you start getting to 50, 60, 70, you gain more perspective, but you start to slow down, and life's a bit more like, how do we just enjoy life? And there'll be a range of time, and I'm 45 now, where I've got to get shit done, and I've got to achieve a certain amount of things. So it's actually probably, for this period of my life, not so bad that my perspective is slightly slanted towards blowing things out of proportion, maybe.
And I think it's like a little bit, on the previous podcast we spoke about luck, and it comes in peaks and troughs and comes in waves. I think for me, I've definitely noticed in my kind of late 20s, if you like, early 30s maybe, it was that kind of perspective of not sweating the small stuff, but it's because of that, you know, the huge adversities I went through. Whereas I think now, obviously I've got the Marathon des Sables coming up, that all kind of came because, you know, almost getting a perspective on things. Okay, look, yeah, life was a bit shit for 10 years, but that's done now. Like, perspective on here and now. What are you doing here and now? So I think it's good to constantly almost analyse yourself again and constantly, you know, put things into perspective, because I spoke to my good friend who's a surgeon, and he always says, you know, when it comes down to surgery, and he explains, he was going through the whole idea of if someone's been in a car accident and they have to amputate their leg, for example, you know, there's never a wrong time to ask the question. You could ask the question 5 seconds later, 5 minutes later, doesn't matter, right? Yeah. Do we need to amputate the leg right now, yes or no? No. You can ask that same question again in 5 seconds. Might be the same answer, might be a wrong answer. You can keep on asking the question. So there's nothing wrong in keep on checking yourself and checking perspective on things, whether it's 5 seconds, 5 minutes, 5 days. And I think that's the key, to just keep things in perspective.
Yeah, there's nothing worse though than running around being frantically, manically, blowing everything out of proportion, stressed, anxious.
Takes me back to the Marbella story when you went the wrong way.
Yeah.
Something like that. I remember looking at your Mrs. Eddie going like, giving her a look.
Because we were stuck in traffic or something.
Yeah. Maybe 10 minutes late to the house where we were going, which no one was waiting for us anyway. It was like,
does it even matter?
No, things like that.
And I think that's why, when I obviously would be the standard, what I consider is most of the group are probably more like me in a perspective of they've achieved a lot because they're constantly doing a lot. Nothing's right enough. Everything is correcting and improving and progressing. And actually the balance is probably too far that way. It'll be interesting to see, and obviously why we're doing Auschwitz is to bring people back down the continuum towards a mid balance.
I think you've nailed it. I think everyone, be the standard and the guys you work with, 100% more on your level. And I think probably after Auschwitz, I think people will probably start a little bit more to my level. And I think the key is to keep people in the middle. Because I think the problem with being on my side, one of the other negatives I've noticed, is it's definitely made me lazy. And almost, we spoke a little bit about imposter syndrome. They're all linked in many ways, because it's a bit like, by having this perspective on things, I've seen how shitty things can get. I'm now so grateful that I'm through them. I'm on the other side, and I'm doing probably, you know, I'm doing really well considering I'm a lad from Bootle. And I think, oh, this is great. It's, you know, perspective is I've started there. I got blown up. This happened to me. That happened to me. I've actually done all right, all things considered. And I've kind of become a bit lazy, and I've not been as ambitious as maybe I could have. Whereas if I'd kept in that mindset that got me into the Marines, and I'd probably be like you now, right? Okay, next, get it done. Yeah. So I think it's, again, important to analyse things of where you are on that line. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? And like you say, you'll change over age as well.
Yeah. I think what's going to be interesting is, and we talked about this before, but like the LIFECAST, I feel like it's, when we originally said we were going to do it, it was like, how can we get it as raw as we can? You know, so that's why in the early days, we're on a bit more of a health kit now, but the early days we used to drink, like, sometimes we'd have 3 or 4 pints before we even started certain podcasts, because we wanted it to be as honest, as authentic, and as gritty and as real as we could possibly get it. And it's a bit of a risk, that. And I think the next podcast, you know, part 2 of this one, is going to be a risk, because we're literally going to come from Auschwitz with a setup, go straight to the hotel and press play.
Yeah.
And I don't know what's going to happen there, and you don't know what's going to happen there. But I feel like us having the ability to do that on this LIFECAST is what makes a LIFECAST grittily honest and genuine.
That's what worked. Like I say, there are so many messages each week of just, I think people are thankfully quite appreciative of just two mates being quite honest. Yeah. Having conversations, which I'm probably opening up a little bit more than they normally would, or people normally see them. And I think that's definitely one after me. Again, I'm a bit like you, quite emotional, and got no idea what this is going to have in store for us. And
Like you, I'm nervous about the next podcast. I don't know what's going to come out of our, I don't know what reflection's going to happen, what mindset is going to change. I have no idea. And
I think you've nailed it, though. I think I'm really excited to see, because I always talk about you and about how you kind of never stop, and you achieve great success, and then you're on to the next one, and I'm always pulling you back a bit, going, mate, get some perspective, like just take stock, and well done. I think if there's anything that'll make you kind of slow down, I think it'll be like, it could be this.
Well, we're going to see, aren't we? And I think then the podcast after that we're going to do in Spain, we're going out, so it's going to be completely different. We started this podcast really because we were sat in Spain.
On the back of Spain, yeah?
Yeah, for 3 or 4 days. And we got to that point where we're having beers and the banter's gone from the first day, and the second day is getting deep, and we're having meaningful conversations that we felt that if people could have captured that conversation at that time, at that moment, it would have been beneficial. And I do think that it's great that we can go to Krakow and do an immediate podcast immediately on reflection. And then I don't know what the next 2 are going to be. By all means, send in what they're going to be. But it's almost going to be a year to the day since we decided
The idea came
on the beach in Marbella that we're going to do them. So we're going to do a couple of podcasts out there. And I feel having them in those different... I felt the Next 45 podcast really worked because of that.
Yeah, loads of good feedback from that. I just want to say as well, I mean, it was from those beers and chats we had those ideas, and I mean, I know from the messages we've had and the comments and stuff that people definitely have taken a lot from this, but genuinely, mate, me personally, took so much from it. It's been great for me, and just sometimes you're going away and you're thinking, whether it's even a day or 2 later, and you're like, whether it's been a doubt or insecurity that I've had or something I'm interested in, and you kind of just... Because it's not often, is it? You just sit there and you randomly sit like this with your mate and just speak like this. So it's been really refreshing for me.
And I think we're lucky because sometimes you haven't got that person.
No.
Not everybody's got that person where we can sit here, and I know we're being filmed, but if it wasn't being filmed, this is what we're
these are the conversations we were having anyway, wasn't it?
Exactly. So I feel like we're lucky from that perspective. And if you have got that person, then that's great. Have the conversations with them. If you haven't got that person, then hopefully some of these conversations we have hit that nerve or hit that touch point that allow you to be part of the room, part of the conversation, if you like, and maybe sometimes get some answers. So yeah, we'll do a review a year on, but the next one will be interesting, and the 2 after that, because we'll be in Spain. Yeah.
So keep them coming. Keep the subjects you want us talking about coming to us, and we will get as many of them in. Again, keep liking, sharing, commenting, telling your friends about them. And like Paul just said, I hope that this kind of past year or so of LifeCasts have hopefully helped in some way. See you next week.
Cheers.